They left me alone on the operating table while my anesthesia wore off, convinced I was too sedated to hear them rifling through my purse for my safe combination. What they found instead was a recording device that had been capturing their conversations for 3 weeks, and by the time I woke up fully, they'd already sealed their fate by admitting on tape exactly how they planned to inherit my $2 million estate before my heart stopped beating. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But let me rewind to show you how a successful real estate mogul became the target of the most calculated betrayal I've ever witnessed, and how I turned their own greed into the evidence that would strip them of everything they thought they'd already won. My name is Victoria Blackwood, and for 32 years I built an empire in commercial real estate across the Pacific Northwest. 3 Bronze Star properties in downtown Portland, a luxury resort development in Ashland, and enough rental income to fund a small country. I'm 61 years old, sharp as the day I closed my first $1 million deal, and until 6 months ago I trusted my family with my life. That trust nearly killed me. The betrayal started with something as innocent as gallbladder surgery, a routine procedure that should have taken 2 hours and sent me home the same day. Instead, it became the opening move in a chess game where my own daughter and son-in-law had decided I was worth more dead than alive. Cassandra, my daughter, my only child, the woman I'd groomed to take over my business empire, had been acting strange for months before my surgery. Subtle things that my business instincts caught but my mother's heart dismissed. Questions about my estate planning that seemed practical but felt invasive. Conversations about what would happen if scenarios that she claimed were just responsible planning. Comments about how exhausting it must be to manage such a complex portfolio at my age. I should have listened to my gut. In business, I never ignored red flags. But when it came to family, I let love blind me to the obvious warning signs. The surgery was scheduled for 7 a.m. on a Tuesday at Meridian General Hospital in Salem, Oregon. Cassandra and her husband Derek Morrison insisted on driving me, staying with me through pre-op and being there when I woke up. Devoted family members ensuring their beloved mother and mother-in-law received the best possible care. What they were actually doing was positioning themselves for the biggest heist of their lives. Here's what I didn't know at the time. 3 days before my surgery, Derek had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on me, with Cassandra as the beneficiary. The premium was being auto-paid from a joint account I'd set up for family emergencies. The same account where I'd been depositing $3,000 monthly to help them with their mortgage after Derek's consulting business tanked during the pandemic. I also didn't know that Cassandra had already met with 3 different probate attorneys, shopping for the one who would process my estate fastest with the fewest questions asked. She'd presented herself as a concerned daughter preparing for the inevitable, wanting to ensure smooth transitions when the time came. The time, according to their timeline, was supposed to come much sooner than anyone expected, but they underestimated one crucial factor: 32 years of negotiating with developers, investors, and contractors had taught me to trust but verify everything. It had also taught me that the most dangerous threats usually come from the people closest to you, the ones who know your weaknesses, your patterns, your blind spots. When I started noticing their strange behavior, I didn't confront them. I documented. For 3 weeks before my surgery, I carried a digital recording device everywhere. Voice activated, 8-hour battery life, memory for 40 hours of audio. I'd used similar devices during contentious business negotiations, where I suspected partners might try to alter agreements after the fact. Old habits from a woman who'd survived decades in a cutthroat industry. That device captured conversations I never should have heard. Whispered planning sessions in my own kitchen while I supposedly napped upstairs. Phone calls with their consultant, someone who specialized in accelerating inheritance timelines for families with difficult circumstances. Discussions about medication adjustments that would create complications during recovery. They talked about my death like they were planning a vacation. But here's where they made their fatal mistake. They assumed that because I was successful, I was also naive about family dynamics. They thought my business acumen made me vulnerable to emotional manipulation. They believed that a woman who could spot a bad investment from 3 states away would be blind to a murder plot hatched in her own home. They were wrong on every count. The morning of my surgery, as they drove me to Meridian General, I already had copies of the recording device's contents stored in 3 separate locations. My attorney had sealed instructions to open specific files if anything happened to me during what should have been a routine procedure. My business partner, Elena Rodriguez, had a key to a safety deposit box containing evidence of their life insurance fraud and attorney shopping. Most importantly, I'd installed a backup recording system in my hospital room. While they thought they were saying goodbye to a trusting mother who'd never suspect her own daughter of murder, I was actually saying goodbye to the last shred of innocence I had about family loyalty. The woman who went into surgery that morning was someone who still believed blood was thicker than greed. The woman who would wake up from anesthesia would be someone very different, because during the 4 hours I spent unconscious, while they thought they had privacy to search my belongings and finalize their plans, every word they spoke was being recorded by devices they never thought to look for. They celebrated too early, they confessed too much, and by the time the anesthesia fully cleared my system, I had everything I needed to destroy them with the same methodical precision I'd used to build my empire. But this is just the beginning of how a routine medical procedure became the most expensive mistake 2 people ever made in their lives. What happened next would make them wish they'd never heard the name Victoria Blackwood, let alone decided to inherit from her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me tell you exactly who they tried to eliminate, because understanding my background is crucial to understanding why their plan was doomed from the moment they conceived it. I didn't inherit my wealth, I built it from nothing, and that difference would prove to be their downfall. I started Victoria Blackwood Properties in 1991 with $15,000 in savings, and a relentless work ethic that my late husband used to joke could power a small city. Fresh out of Portland State with a business degree and 0 connections in the real estate world, I spent my first 5 years working 18-hour days, sleeping in my car between property showings, and learning every dirty trick that developers, contractors, and investors could pull. By 1995, I owned my first commercial building, a rundown office complex in southeast Portland that everyone said was a money pit. I renovated it myself, working nights and weekends with power tools and YouTube tutorials, then leased it to 3 tech startups that would later become multi-million-dollar companies. That building taught me 2 lessons that would define my entire career: never trust anyone's assessment of what's impossible, and always verify every detail yourself. The tech boom of the late 90s turned that $80,000 investment into $2.3 million when I sold the building, but instead of celebrating, I used every penny as seed money for bigger projects. While other investors were throwing money at .com stocks, I was quietly buying undervalued commercial properties across Oregon and Washington. When the tech bubble burst in 2001, I was the vulture circling the wreckage. Failed companies dumped prime real estate for pennies on the dollar. Panicked investors sold commercial properties to anyone with cash. In 18 months, I acquired 12 buildings that would form the backbone of my empire. But success in real estate isn't just about buying low and selling high, it's about reading people, understanding their motivations, their pressure points, their tells when they're lying or desperate or planning to screw you over. I spent 3 decades learning to spot deception from across a conference table, to catch financial fraud in quarterly reports, to identify when someone was running a long con disguised as a legitimate deal. I negotiated with Russian oligarchs who smiled while planning to default on payment. I caught embezzlement schemes from property managers who'd been stealing from me for years. I survived partnership disputes where former friends hired private investigators to find dirt on my personal life. I even faced down a contractor who tried to intimidate me with thinly veiled threats when I refused to pay for substandard work. Through it all, I developed what my business associates called the Blackwood method, a systematic approach to due diligence that assumed everyone was lying until proven otherwise. I documented everything, recorded important conversations, maintained detailed files on every person I dealt with, and always had backup plans for my backup plans. This wasn't paranoia, it was survival in an industry where one bad deal could wipe out decades of work. By 2015, Victoria Blackwood Properties owned 43 commercial buildings across 4 states. The crown jewel was the Riverside Tower in downtown Portland, 32 floors of premium office space that I'd bought as a condemned building and transformed into the most sought-after business address in the Pacific Northwest. Monthly rental income from my properties exceeded. My net worth hit $8.2 million, but the real measure of my success wasn't the money. It was the respect I'd earned from people who'd initially dismissed me as just another small-time investor who'd get chewed up and spit out by the big player. When the Portland Business Journal named me Commercial Real Estate Developer of the Year in 2018, the award ceremony was attended by competitors who'd spent decades trying to outmaneuver me. I was invited to speak at real estate conferences across the country. Business schools used my renovation of the Riverside Tower as a case study in creative financing and urban development. Young investors sought me out for mentorship, hoping to learn the secrets of building sustainable wealth in a volatile industry. What I taught them was simple: success comes from preparation, patience, and the absolute refusal to trust anyone with your financial future except yourself. I should have applied that same philosophy to my family. My daughter Cassandra grew up watching me work. She saw the late nights, the site visits, the endless phone calls with contractors and tenants and city planning officials. She accompanied me to property inspections, learned to spot structural problems and zoning violations, even helped with renovations during summer breaks from college. When she graduated from University of Oregon with degrees in business and architecture, I thought she'd be the perfect successor to my empire. Smart, educated, familiar with the business, and carrying the Blackwood name that had become synonymous with successful commercial development in the Northwest. I was grooming her to take over everything I'd built. Derek Morrison seemed like the ideal partner for her. MBA from Portland State, experience in business consulting, and a calm demeanor that balanced Cassandra's sometimes impulsive decision-making. When they married in 2019, I paid for the entire wedding, $85,000 for a celebration at the Columbia River Gorge that was featured in Oregon Wedding magazine. I also gave them a $200,000 down payment for their house in Lake Oswego, added Derek to my company's health insurance plan, and created a family trust that would ensure their financial security for life. What I didn't realize was that I'd been funding the very people who were planning to inherit everything I owned by ensuring I didn't live long enough to enjoy it myself. You see, 32 years of spotting deception in business deals hadn't prepared me for the possibility that my own daughter might view me as just another investment opportunity. I could identify a fraudulent contractor from his body language during the first meeting, but I missed the signs that my own child was calculating the value of my death. That blindness, the one gap in my otherwise comprehensive paranoia, would nearly cost me everything. But here's what Cassandra and Derek didn't understand about the woman they were trying to eliminate. The same skills that built a multi-million-dollar empire from nothing would prove equally effective at dismantling a murder plot. They thought they were targeting a trusting mother. What they actually declared war on was a predator who'd spent 3 decades learning to destroy anyone who tried to take what was mine. The relationship between Cassandra, Derek, and me had always been what I considered beautifully uncomplicated. Unlike the Byzantine power struggles and hidden agendas that defined my business relationships, family felt refreshingly straightforward. We had Sunday dinners at my house in West Lynn every week, took annual vacations together to destinations they chose, and maintained the kind of open communication that I'd never managed to establish with business partners, or so I believe. Looking back now, I can see how carefully they'd constructed this illusion of normalcy, but at the time, their behavior seemed like nothing more than a daughter and son-in-law who genuinely cared about my well-being and future. After Derek's consulting business collapsed in March 2023, a casualty of corporate budget cuts that eliminated most of his client contracts, I didn't hesitate to step in with financial support. The $3,000 monthly payments to help with their mortgage weren't charity, they were family assistance, the kind of safety net that successful people provide for their loved ones during temporary setbacks. Cassandra had been working part-time for Victoria Blackwood Properties since college, handling tenant relations and property inspections for our smaller building. She was good at the work, detail-oriented and personable with tenants, but she'd never shown the aggressive drive necessary to expand the business. I'd assumed she was simply taking her time to develop confidence before taking on larger responsibility. Derek seemed grateful for the financial help and eager to contribute however he could. He started accompanying Cassandra on property visits, offering suggestions for cost-saving renovations and efficiency improvement. His MBA background proved useful for analyzing cash flow projections and identifying underperforming assets. I began including him in quarterly business reviews, thinking that his fresh perspective might help identify opportunities I'd missed. They attended every major business event with me. When I received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Oregon Commercial Real Estate Association in September 2023, they were front and center at the ceremony, applauding as I accepted recognition for transforming the landscape of Pacific Northwest commercial development. The photo from that night, the three of us smiling together as I held the Crystal Award, still sits on my desk, though it now serves as a reminder of how completely I misread their intention. During the fall of 2023, Cassandra began showing more interest in the technical aspects of estate planning and business succession. She asked thoughtful questions about how property transfers worked, what tax implications might affect inherited real estate, and how to ensure continuity of operations if something unexpected happened to me. These conversations felt natural and responsible. At 61, I should have been discussing succession planning with my designated heir. The fact that she was finally engaging with these topics seriously seemed like maturity, not manipulation. Derek's questions were more focused on the financial infrastructure. He wanted to understand how my various accounts were structured, which investments generated the most reliable income, and what safeguards I'd established to protect assets during market downturn. As someone with an MBA and consulting experience, his interest in financial optimization made perfect sense. I was so pleased by their growing engagement with the business that I made what would prove to be a series of costly mistakes. In October, I added Derek's name to my primary business checking account, the one that received rental income deposits and paid operating expenses. The account typically maintained a balance between $150,000 and $300,000, depending on the time of month and any major maintenance project. I justified this decision as practical emergency planning. If something happened to me, suddenly, they'd need immediate access to funds for property management and business operations. In November, I updated my will to include more specific provisions for business continuity. The new version designated Cassandra as primary beneficiary of all real estate holdings, with Derek named as backup executor if she was unable to fulfill those duties. I also established a detailed succession plan that would transfer property management responsibilities to them immediately upon my death, rather than going through lengthy probate proceedings. Most significantly, I shared copies of these documents with both of them, explaining each provision and answering their questions about implementation. I wanted them to understand their future responsibilities so they could prepare accordingly. What I was actually doing was providing them with a complete roadmap for inheriting $8.2 million in assets, along with immediate access to the cash flow necessary to maintain those properties. By December 2023, our Sunday dinners had evolved into informal business strategy sessions. We'd discuss upcoming renovations, review tenant applications, and analyze market trends that might affect property values. Derek proved particularly insightful about identifying buildings that might benefit from modernization or repositioning in the market. I began delegating more operational responsibilities to them, partly because I wanted to gradually reduce my workload and partly because their involvement seemed to be strengthening our family bond. They handled routine maintenance coordination for 6 of my smaller properties, managed lease renewals for several long-term tenants, and even negotiated a favorable contract with a new landscaping company that saved me $18,000 annually. The trust I placed in them extended beyond business matters. When I decided to undergo gallbladder surgery in early 2024, they insisted on handling all the arrangements. Cassandra researched surgeons and hospitals, ultimately recommending Dr. Tricia Kellerman at Meridian General because of her excellent reputation and the hospital's state-of-the-art facilities. Derek offered to manage all my business responsibilities during recovery, ensuring that tenant issues were resolved quickly and that rental income continued flowing without interruption. He even prepared a detailed temporary power of attorney that would allow him to handle urgent financial matters if I was incapacitated longer than expected. Their level of care and preparation impressed. Here was my family, stepping up to ensure that both my health and my business interests were protected during a vulnerable time. The fact that they were thinking ahead, anticipating potential complications, and preparing contingency plans, seemed like exactly the kind of responsible planning that I'd tried to instill in Cassandra throughout her life. I should have been suspicious of their sudden hyper-competence. I should have questioned why Derek was so interested in understanding every detail of my financial structure. I should have wondered why Cassandra kept steering conversations toward what would happen if my recovery took longer than expected or if complications arose during surgery. Instead, I interpreted their behavior as evidence that they were finally ready to assume the leadership roles I'd been preparing them for. The business acumen that had protected me from countless predators in the commercial real estate world somehow failed to activate when the threat was coming from my own dining room table. The most damning evidence of my blindness came in late January, just 2 weeks before my scheduled surgery. During one of our Sunday dinners, Derek mentioned that he'd been researching medical malpractice statistics and was concerned about the risks associated with gallbladder surgery for women over 60. He presented his findings with charts and statistics showing complication rates, recovery timelines, and factors that could lead to adverse outcomes. His thoroughness seemed like the kind of protective research that a caring son-in-law would conduct to ensure his mother-in-law was making an informed decision. What he was actually doing was establishing a foundation for explaining why my death wouldn't be suspicious. As I would later discover, every question they'd asked about my estate, every suggestion they'd made about succession planning, every expression of concern about my surgery had been carefully calculated to position themselves for the fastest possible inheritance, with the fewest legal complications. They'd spent 6 months turning our family relationship into a business transaction, and I'd been too blinded by love and trust to see the spreadsheet they were building around my death. The first crack in their carefully constructed facade appeared on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week before my scheduled surgery. I was in my home office reviewing quarterly rental reports when I heard Cassandra's voice drifting up from the kitchen, speaking in the hushed tones people use when they don't want to be overheard. She was on the phone, and something about her inflection made me pause. In 32 years of business, I'd learned to distinguish between normal conversation and the kind of guarded discussion that happens when someone is hiding something significant. This fell squarely into the latter category. I moved quietly to the top of the stairs where the acoustics of my 1920s craftsman house created an unexpected eavesdropping opportunity. The original builders had installed a central heating system with large floor vents that carried sound between floors with remarkable clarity, a feature I'd discovered during my first winter in the house but had never had reason to exploit until that moment. "No, the surgery is definitely happening next Tuesday," Cassandra was saying. Dr. Kellerman confirmed the time slot yesterday, 7 a.m. sharp. A pause, then. Right. That gives us approximately 4 hours while she's under anesthesia. Derek thinks that's more than enough time to handle everything we discussed. My blood turned cold. Handle everything they discussed? What exactly needed to be handled while I was unconscious and vulnerable? The combination hasn't changed, she continued. Still her birthday backwards plus the year she bought her first building. She's sentimental about that kind of thing. They were talking about my safe combination. The safe in my bedroom that contained original property deeds, insurance policies, and emergency cash reserves. The same safe that Cassandra had watched me open dozens of times over the years when I needed to retrieve important documents. Derek already confirmed that the life insurance policy is active and current. $500,000, just like we planned. The premium comes out automatically, so there's no paper trail connecting us to the application. Life insurance policy. I didn't recall approving any life insurance beyond my existing coverage through the business. My hands gripped the stair railing as the implications began to crystallize. Look, we've been planning this for months. Cassandra's voice dropped even lower. Everything is in place. The timing is perfect. After the surgery, we just need to make sure the recovery doesn't go as smoothly as expected. The conversation ended abruptly, and I heard her footsteps moving toward the front door. I retreated to my office, my mind racing through the fragments of what I'd just heard. Surgery timing, safe combinations, life insurance policies, recovery complications. Each piece was potentially innocent on its own, but together they formed a pattern that my business instincts recognized immediately. Someone was preparing to profit from my death. I sat at my desk for 20 minutes, staring at the quarterly reports without seeing them, while my brain processed this new reality. My daughter and son-in-law weren't just planning to inherit my estate eventually, they were actively working to accelerate the timeline. But I needed more information before drawing conclusions. 3 decades of negotiating complex deals had taught me that assumptions based on partial information could be catastrophically wrong. I needed evidence, not suspicion. That afternoon, I told them I was feeling anxious about the surgery and would be spending more time at home over the next week to rest and prepare mentally. This gave me the cover I needed to observe their behavior more closely. The changes in their routine became obvious once I started paying attention. Derek made several phone calls from his car in my driveway, always stepping outside when the conversations became intense. Cassandra spent unusual amounts of time on her laptop, closing windows quickly whenever I entered the room. Most tellingly, they'd begun having whispered conferences in my guest bathroom, the one room in the house where the heating vents didn't carry sound effectively. These conversations happened multiple times each day, always when they thought I was napping or otherwise occupied. On Thursday, 2 days after overhearing the safe combination discussion, I decided to test their knowledge and intention. During our usual evening conversation about surgery preparations, I casually mentioned that I was thinking about moving some important documents to a safety deposit box for extra security. The reaction was immediate and telling. Cassandra's face tightened almost imperceptibly, and Derek leaned forward with sudden interest. "What kind of documents?" Derek asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Property deeds, insurance policies, maybe some cash reserves," I replied, watching their faces. "Just seems prudent to have everything secure while I'm recovering. But wouldn't that make things more complicated if we need access to anything for business operations?" Cassandra countered quickly. "I mean, if there are any urgent issues while you're in the hospital." "What urgent issues would require access to property deeds?" I asked. The question hung in the air for several seconds before Derek responded. "Well, you never know what might come up. Insurance claims, tenant, emergencies. That sort of thing." It was a reasonable answer, but his body language told a different story. He was sweating slightly despite the cool evening temperature, and his hands had developed a barely perceptible tremor. That night I made my first strategic decision. I would not be moving any documents to a safety deposit box, but I would let them believe I was considering it to see how they responded to the threat of reduced access to my asset. The response came Friday morning in the form of Derek offering to help research safety deposit box options by contacting various banks about their security protocols and access procedure. What he was actually doing, I realized, was trying to determine which bank I might choose and what requirements would be necessary for accessing the box. Friday evening brought the most disturbing revelation yet. I was in my bedroom around 9 p.m. when I heard them in the kitchen below. Voices raised just enough that fragments carried through the heating vents. "Can't wait any longer," Derek's voice, stressed and urgent, told you the timeline. Cassandra responding. "Complications during surgery are completely normal. Heart rate irregularities, common in patients her age. No one questions natural causes." I pressed my ear closer to the vent, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid they might hear it downstairs. "The consultant said it has to look like surgical complications," Derek continued. "Something that develops during recovery. Not immediate, but within the first 48 hours. Consultant? They had hired professional help for whatever they were planning. Dr. Kellerman won't be suspicious," Cassandra replied. "She sees complications in elderly patients all the time, especially with underlying conditions." Underlying conditions? I was 61 years old and in excellent health. My pre-surgery tests had shown no issues beyond the gallbladder inflammation that necessitated the procedure. "What about the medication adjustments?" Derek asked. "Already arranged. The night nurse has been briefed on the special requirement. She thinks it's standard post-operative care for patients with anxiety issues." They had spent months developing a comprehensive plan to ensure my death appeared to be the result of surgical complications rather than foul play. They had researched statistics about surgical mortality rates for women my age. They had established relationships with hospital staff who would unknowingly participate in their plan. They had arranged for medication protocols that would create the appearance of natural complications while actually inducing fatal outcomes. Most chillingly, they had done all of this while maintaining the loving, supportive facade of family members concerned about my well-being. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and processing what I'd learned, one thought dominated my mind. If I proceeded with surgery as scheduled, there was a very real possibility that I would not survive the recovery period. But canceling the surgery would only delay their plans, not eliminate them. Eventually they would find another opportunity, another medical procedure, another moment of vulnerability, another chance to implement their carefully researched methods. I needed a different strategy. Instead of avoiding the trap they'd set, I needed to turn it against them. That's when I remembered the digital recording device I'd used during contentious business negotiations. The voice-activated system that had helped me document contractor fraud attempts and partnership betrayals over the years. If they were planning to use my surgery as cover for murder, then I would use their own words as evidence of their intention. The hunt was about to begin, and for the first time since discovering their plot, I felt the familiar surge of strategic excitement that had driven my success in commercial real estate. They thought they were predators stalking an unsuspecting victim. What they had actually done was walk into the territory of someone who had spent 3 decades learning to destroy anyone foolish enough to try taking what belonged to her. The next morning, I drove to downtown Salem under the pretense of handling pre-surgery business errands. My actual destination was Precision Electronics, a specialty shop that catered to private investigators, security consultants, and business executives who needed discreet surveillance equipment. I'd used their services twice before, once to catch a property manager who was skimming rental payments, and once to document a contractor's fraud during a major renovation project. The owner, Marcus Chen, greeted me with the professional discretion that had made his business successful among Portland's more paranoid corporate elite. When I explained that I needed voice-activated recording equipment for sensitive family discussions, he didn't ask for details beyond the technical specifications I required. Battery life is crucial, I told him. I need something that can record continuously for at least 8 hours without maintenance. Voice activation or manual control? Marcus asked, spreading several devices across his counter. Voice activation, and it needs to be completely undetectable to someone who isn't specifically looking for recording equipment. He selected a device slightly larger than a USB drive. This model activates automatically when it detects conversation within a 15-foot radius. 12-hour battery life, 48 hours of memory storage. The audio quality is excellent, clear enough for court proceedings if necessary. Court proceedings, the phrase sent a chill through me, but also provided a sense of purpose. Whatever I recorded would need to meet legal standards for evidence. I'll take 2, I said. And I need a crash course in optimal placement for maximum audio capture. Marcus spent the next hour teaching me about acoustic patterns, dead zones, and placement strategy. The devices were designed to be hidden in everyday objects, inside tissue boxes, taped under furniture, or concealed in decorative items. The key was positioning them where natural conversation would occur while ensuring they wouldn't be discovered during casual cleaning or rearranging. That afternoon, I began implementing what I privately called Operation Documentation. The first device went into my kitchen, taped inside the cabinet above the coffee maker where Cassandra and Derek frequently gathered for their morning conversation. The second device I kept mobile, moving it to different locations based on where I expected their planning discussions to take place. The results were immediate and horrifying. That evening, while I was supposedly napping in my bedroom, they held an extensive planning session in my living room. The recording device, hidden inside a decorative bowl on the coffee table, captured every word with crystal clarity. Dr. Kellerman confirmed that Victoria's surgery is scheduled for approximately 2 hours. Derek's voice came through clearly on playback. Gallbladder removal, general anesthesia, standard recovery protocols. And you verified the medication timing with Sarah? Cassandra asked. Sarah Martinez, the night shift nurse. She starts her rotation at 11 p.m. on Tuesday. She thinks Victoria has a history of anxiety and panic attacks, so the additional sedatives will seem medically appropriate. Additional sedatives. My hands clenched as I listened to them casually discuss drugging me beyond the standard post-operative protocol. What exactly is she going to administer? Cassandra continued. A combination that will suppress respiratory function gradually. Sarah thinks it's a prescribed anti-anxiety medication. The beauty is that respiratory depression is a known complication of gallbladder surgery, especially in patients over 60. And the timing, Wednesday morning, around 3 a.m., Sarah will administer what she believes is a standard dose of anti-anxiety medication. Victoria's breathing will become increasingly shallow over the next 2 to 3 hours. By 6 a.m., when the day shift arrives, it will appear that she developed complications during the night. What about the life insurance investigation? The policy has been active for 4 months, which puts us well beyond the contestability period for suicide claims. Since this will appear to be surgical complications, there won't be any investigation beyond standard procedural review. I had to pause the recording several times to process what I was hearing. They hadn't just planned to kill me. They had researched the specific methods, bribed a hospital employee, established false medical histories, and calculated insurance investigation timeline. The recording continued with logistics that made my blood run cold. The safe combination definitely works, Derek asked. I tested it yesterday while she was at her lawyer's office. All the property deeds are there, plus about $30,000 in cash and her emergency jewelry collection. And the power of attorney documents, ready to file immediately. Once she's declared dead, I become the executor of her estate with full authority over all property transfers. Derek, as my husband gets automatic access to the joint account we established. Timeline for estate settlement. Probate attorney says we can have preliminary asset transfers within 2 weeks, if there are no complications. Full estate settlement within 60 days. They had researched probate procedures, they had consulted attorneys, they had established joint accounts that would give Derek immediate access to my money upon my death. The most chilling part came near the end of their conversation. "You're sure she doesn't suspect anything?" Derek asked. "Absolutely not. She's been so grateful for our help with the surgery arrangements. Mom still sees me as her little girl who would never hurt her. And if something goes wrong, if she survives the medications or someone gets suspicious, we have contingency plans. Sarah can adjust the dosage if the first attempt doesn't work, and if there are any questions about the complications, Dr. Kellerman will testify that respiratory distress is a common post-operative issue for patients Victoria's age. Contingency plan. They had backup methods for ensuring my death if their primary approach failed. Over the next 3 days I collected over 6 hours of recorded conversations that documented every aspect of their plot. They discussed the forged medical history they had created to justify the additional medications. They reviewed the financial documentation that would expedite their inheritance claims. They even practiced the grief-stricken responses they would display when informed of my unexpected death. But the most damaging evidence came from a conversation they had on Sunday, exactly 48 hours before my scheduled surgery. "I almost feel guilty about this," Cassandra said, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that I had never heard before. "Guilty about what?" Derek replied. "About Mom. She's been so good to us, the money for the house, helping with the mortgage, bringing me into the business. Part of me wonders if we should just wait for her to die naturally." "Cassandra, we've been over this. Your mother is 61 years old, and in excellent health. She could live another 25 years. Her business is worth $8 million now. But property values are cyclical. If there's a market downturn, we could lose millions in potential inheritance. But killing her? We're not killing her. We're simply ensuring that surgical complications occur that would have been possible anyway. People die from gallbladder surgery every day. Do they?" I researched the statistics. Approximately 0.5% of patients experience fatal complications from gallbladder removal. "We're just making sure your mother falls into that statistical category." The casual way Derek discussed murdering me, reducing it to statistical probabilities and market timing, was more chilling than any overt threat could have been. He had dehumanized me completely, viewing my death as nothing more than an investment strategy with acceptable risk parameters. But Cassandra's moment of doubt provided something even more valuable than evidence of their intentions. It revealed a potential weakness in their partnership that I could explore. By Monday morning, 24 hours before my surgery, I had enough recorded evidence to convict them of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and probably a dozen other felonies. But simply turning the recordings over to police would only result in arrests and prosecution. It wouldn't protect me from the immediate threat they posed, and it wouldn't ensure that justice extended beyond simple criminal penalties. I wanted more than legal consequences. I wanted to destroy them as completely as they had planned to destroy me. That's when I developed what would become the most satisfying strategy of my entire career. Instead of avoiding their trap, I would walk directly into it, but with modifications that would turn their own plan into evidence of their guilt. They thought they were orchestrating my death. What they were actually doing was providing me with the perfect opportunity to demonstrate why underestimating Victoria Blackwood had ruined the financial futures of everyone foolish enough to try it over the past 32 years. The hunt was about to enter its most dangerous phase, and I had never felt more alive. Monday evening, I sat in my home office reviewing the mountain of evidence I'd accumulated while finalizing the most crucial decision of my life: whether to proceed with the surgery, knowing it was designed to be my execution, or to abort their plan and lose the opportunity to catch them in the act. The recordings alone were devastating. 6 hours of documented conspiracy, detailed planning, and casual discussions about murdering me for inheritance money. Any prosecutor would consider it a slam dunk case. But criminal convictions, while satisfying, wouldn't address the deeper betrayal or ensure that justice extended beyond prison sentences. I wanted total destruction of their lives, not just temporary incarceration. That's when I discovered evidence that elevated their betrayal from family treachery to systematic fraud that could destroy dozens of other families. While reviewing my business bank statements to prepare for the confrontation, I noticed a series of small transfers from my operating account that I hadn't authorized. Each transaction was under $500 amounts, small enough to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts, but collectively totaling over $8,000 across the past 3 months. The transfers were going to something called Heritage Consulting Services, with a Portland address I didn't recognize. A quick internet search revealed that Heritage Consulting Services specialized in estate acceleration and inheritance optimization for families facing complex financial circumstances. Their website featured testimonials from clients who had successfully navigated challenging inheritance situations and expedited estate settlement. Reading between the lines, Heritage Consulting Services appeared to be a company that helped families speed up inheritance timelines through methods that ranged from aggressive legal strategies to more questionable approaches. I called the number listed on their website, posing as a potential client whose elderly father was proving more resilient than expected despite serious health issues. The receptionist immediately transferred me to someone named Richard Valdez, who spoke about their services in euphemisms that clearly indicated they specialized in helping people inherit money faster than natural death would provide. "We understand that families sometimes face urgent financial pressures that can't wait for traditional timelines," Valdez explained. "Our consultants have extensive experience in medical, legal, and financial strategies that can help resolve these situations efficiently." "What kind of medical strategies?" I asked. "We work with healthcare professionals who understand how to optimize treatment outcomes for elderly patients, particularly those undergoing surgical procedures or managing complex medication regimens." The implications were horrifying. Heritage Consulting Services wasn't just helping individual families commit inheritance fraud. They were operating a systematic business that connected potential murderers with corrupt medical professionals. I scheduled a consultation for Thursday, 3 days after my surgery, using a fake name and claiming to need help with my stubborn father's estate situation. This would give me the opportunity to gather evidence about their broader operations, while potentially identifying other families who might be planning similar murders. But first I needed to survive Tuesday. That night I implemented the most complex strategic plan of my career. Instead of canceling the surgery or alerting authorities, I would proceed exactly as Cassandra and Derek expected, but with modifications that would turn their murder plot into their downfall. My first call was to Elena Rodriguez, my business partner and the one person I trusted completely. Elena had managed the financial side of Victoria Blackwood Properties for 8 years, and her forensic accounting background made her invaluable for complex business investigation. Elena, I need you to do something that's going to sound insane, but I need you to trust me completely, I said when she answered. Victoria, you sound terrified. What's happening? I explained the entire situation, the overheard conversations, the recorded evidence, the planned murder during my surgery recovery. Elena listened without interruption, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I described the medication poisoning plan. We're calling the police right now, she said immediately. No, that only gets them arrested for conspiracy. I want to catch them in the act of attempted murder, document their confession, and simultaneously expose the consulting company that's helping other families do the same thing. Victoria, you're talking about using yourself as bait for people who are planning to kill you. That's not strategy, that's suicide. It's calculated risk management, I corrected. The same approach I've used for 32 years in business. I control the variables, I minimize the actual danger, and I maximize the evidence collection. I outlined my plan. Elena would be stationed at the hospital during my surgery and recovery, posing as a family friend but actually serving as my protection and documentation witness. She would have copies of all the recorded evidence, instructions for contacting authorities if anything went wrong, and most importantly, the ability to intervene if the situation became genuinely life-threatening. I'll also have a second recording device in my hospital room, I continued. Whatever they say while they think I'm unconscious will be captured on audio. What about the nurse they've bribed, Sarah Martinez? I've already verified her identity and shift schedule. I'll be requesting a different nurse for my recovery, claiming anxiety about unfamiliar medical staff. The hospital will accommodate the request without question, and if they try to administer the medication anyway, Elena, they can't poison me if I'm not actually sedated. I'll be awake and alert the entire time, just pretending to be unconscious. The most crucial element of my plan involved convincing Dr. Kellerman to modify the anesthesia protocol without explaining why. I called her office Monday night, claiming to have developed severe anxiety about general anesthesia due to family history of adverse reactions. Kellerman agreed to use a lighter sedation protocol that would allow me to maintain consciousness while appearing to be fully anesthetized. This approach was commonly used for patients with anxiety disorders or those who had experienced complications with general anesthesia in the past. You'll be conscious but heavily sedated, she explained. You won't be able to move or speak, but you'll be aware of your surroundings. Is that acceptable? It was perfect. I would be able to hear everything Cassandra and Derek said while they believed I was completely unconscious. Tuesday morning arrived with the artificial normalcy that I'd become accustomed to over the past week. Cassandra and Derek were the picture of concerned family members, arriving early to drive me to the hospital and staying with me through the pre-operative procedures. Their performance was flawless. Cassandra held my hand during the pre-surgery consultation, asking Dr. Kellerman detailed questions about recovery timelines and potential complications. Derek took careful notes about post-operative care instructions, ensuring he would be prepared to help with anything Victoria might need. Watching them maintain this facade of loving concern while knowing they were planning to murder me within the next 24 hours was surreal. Their acting skills were so convincing that I almost doubted my own evidence, but as they wheeled me toward the operating room, Derek leaned down and whispered something that confirmed everything I'd recorded. Don't worry, Victoria. We'll take care of everything while you're sleeping. You won't have to worry about anything ever again. The words were perfectly ambiguous to any observer, but I recognized the cold finality in his tone. This was a man saying goodbye to someone he expected never to see alive again. As the modified anesthesia took effect, my last coherent thought was a predator's satisfaction. They believed they were about to inherit $8 million by murdering a trusting mother. What they were actually about to do was confess to conspiracy and attempted murder while being recorded by devices they had no idea existed, in front of a witness they didn't know was there, during a procedure that wouldn't actually leave me vulnerable to their poison. When I woke up from surgery, I would no longer be Victoria Blackwood, the trusting mother. I would be Victoria Blackwood, the hunter, and the prey had just walked into my trap. The surgery proceeded exactly as planned, though planned now had an entirely different meaning than it had 24 hours earlier. Kellerman's modified anesthesia protocol worked perfectly. I was conscious enough to hear conversations, but appeared completely unconscious to anyone observing my vital signs or physical responses. The gallbladder removal itself took approximately 90 minutes. Through the fog of sedation, I could hear the surgical team's professional chatter, the rhythmic beeping of monitoring equipment, and occasional updates about my stable condition. Kellerman's voice was calm and confident throughout the procedure, noting that everything was proceeding without complications. But the real operation began when they wheeled me into the recovery room. Alina was already positioned there, having arrived during my surgery under the guise of being my designated emergency contact. She had introduced herself to the nursing staff as my business partner and closest friend, explaining that she would be staying overnight to assist with any business matters that might arise during my recovery. The staff accepted her presence without question. Private rooms at Meridian General frequently accommodated family members or close friends who wanted to provide additional support during recovery periods. What they didn't know was that Alina had placed additional recording devices throughout the room while I was in surgery. One was hidden inside the flower arrangement she'd brought as a cover story. Another was taped under the bedside table where visitors typically sat. A third was concealed inside the bathroom, positioned to capture conversations that might take place away from my bed. The setup was comprehensive enough to document anything Cassandra and Derek might say, regardless of where they positioned themselves in the room. I was transferred to recovery around 2 p.m., still maintaining the appearance of deep sedation while actually being alert enough to understand everything happening around me. The modified anesthesia created a perfect balance. I looked completely unconscious to casual observation, but my cognitive function was clear enough to process conversations and make decisions. Cassandra and Derek arrived within minutes of my room assignment, carrying flowers and wearing expressions of appropriate concern for any hospital staff who might be watching. "How is she doing?" Cassandra asked the nurse who was checking my initial recovery vitals. "Very well." Kellerman said the surgery went perfectly, no complications, excellent response to anesthesia. She should wake up naturally in the next 2 to 3 hours. And her vital signs are stable, completely normal. Heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen levels, everything looks great. She's a strong woman for her age. Derek moved closer to my bed, ostensibly to check on my comfort, but actually to verify that I was truly unconscious. He leaned over and spoke my name softly, then waved his hand near my face. Satisfied that I wasn't responding, he stepped back and nodded to Cassandra. "We'll stay with her until she wakes up," Cassandra told the nurse. "Family should be here when she comes around. Of course, I'll be checking on her every 30 minutes, but call if you need anything sooner." The moment the nurse left the room, their entire demeanor changed. "She's completely out," Derek confirmed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Perfect timing." "Alina, right? The business partner." Cassandra glanced toward Alina, who was sitting in the corner chair reading a magazine with convincing disinterest. "Should we ask her to step out?" "No, that would look suspicious. Besides, she's focused on her reading. We just need to keep our voices down." What they didn't realize was that Alina's magazine reading was actually a performance designed to make them comfortable enough to have the conversations I needed to record. She had positioned herself close enough to hear everything while appearing completely absorbed in her reading material. "Did you confirm the nurse situation?" Cassandra asked. "Sarah Martinez starts her shift at 11 p.m., just like we arranged. She thinks Victoria has severe anxiety about being in the hospital, so the additional sedatives will seem completely appropriate. And you have the medication?" Derek patted his jacket pocket. "Liquid form, tasteless, mixes easily with any beverage. Sarah thinks it's a prescription anti-anxiety medication that was specially prepared by Victoria's regular doctor. Timeline? Sarah will administer it around 3 a.m. when she does her routine check. Victoria will drink it thinking it's regular medication for post-surgical anxiety. The respiratory depression will begin within an hour and progressively worsen." "How long until?" Complete respiratory failure. Dr. Kellerman estimated 3 to 4 hours from administration. By 7 a.m. when the day shift arrives, it will be over. Alina's magazine rustled slightly as she turned a page, and both Cassandra and Derek glanced in her direction. Satisfied that she wasn't paying attention to their conversation, they continued. The inheritance paperwork is ready, Derek asked. Filed and waiting. The moment Dr. Kellerman signs the death certificate, I become the executor with full authority over all assets. The life insurance claim can be submitted within 48 hours. And the property transfers? Already prepared. Alina won't have any legal standing to contest anything since she's just a business partner, not family. By the time anyone questions the timeline, we'll have legal ownership of everything. The casual way they discussed dismantling my life's work was almost more infuriating than their murder plans. They had researched every legal loophole, prepared every document, and calculated every timeline necessary to steal my empire within days of my death. But they had also just provided me with recorded evidence of premeditated murder, insurance fraud, inheritance manipulation, and conspiracy that would destroy them more completely than any business rival I'd ever faced. What about the consulting company? Cassandra, when do we make the final payment? Richard Valdez expects the remaining $25,000 within a week of successful completion. He said this is one of their most complex arrangements, but the payout justifies the risk. $25,000. They had paid Heritage Consulting Services $25,000 to orchestrate my murder. This wasn't just family betrayal, it was organized crime with professional coordination and systematic methodology. Have they handled situations like this before? Valdez said, they've successfully managed 12 similar cases over the past 3 years. All appeared to be natural deaths or surgical complications. No investigations, no complications, no problems with insurance payouts. 12 cases. Heritage Consulting Services had helped 12 other families commit murder for inheritance money. 12 families like mine had been destroyed by the same systematic approach that Cassandra and Derek were implementing. The scope of their operation was staggering, but it also provided me with leverage I hadn't expected. If I could document their broader criminal enterprise, I could potentially save other families while ensuring that Cassandra and Derek faced charges that would put them in prison for life. The safe combination definitely works, Derek asked, returning to their immediate concerns. I tested it again yesterday. All the property deeds are there, plus the emergency cash and jewelry. Once we have legal authority, we can clean it out immediately. And Alina won't be a problem. She's just an employee, no legal rights, no inheritance claims, no authority over estate matters. We can terminate her involvement in the business immediately. Alina's magazine rustled again, and I caught the slightest tightening around her eye. She was maintaining her cover perfectly, but I could tell that hearing them dismiss her so casually was making her angry. Good. Alina's anger would fuel her determination to see this through to the end. Are you having any second thoughts? Derek asked quietly. For a moment Cassandra was silent, and I wondered if her earlier doubts might resurface. No, she finally said. Mom's had a good life. She built something valuable, and now it's time for the next generation to benefit from her success. That's what inheritance is for. And this way she doesn't have to suffer through years of declining health or worry about losing her independence. They were rationalizing murder as mercy killing, convincing themselves that they were doing me a favor by ending my life while I was still healthy and successful. Plus, Derek added, the consulting company was right about the market timing. Property values are at their peak right now. If we wait 5 or 10 years for natural death, we could lose millions in market fluctuation. They had reduced my life to an investment decision, calculating the optimal timing for maximum profit from my death. As visiting hours ended and the evening nursing staff took over, Cassandra and Derek prepared to leave for the night. They would return around 2:30 a.m. to be present when Sarah Martinez administered what she believed was anti-anxiety medication but was actually the poison that would kill me. Sleep well, Mom, Cassandra said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. Tomorrow will be a better day. Derek squeezed my hand gently. Don't worry about anything, Victoria. We'll handle everything from here. Their performance of grief-stricken concern was flawless, even when they thought I couldn't hear them. But as they left the room, Alina caught my eye for just a moment. The slight nod she gave me confirmed that every word had been recorded, that the evidence was secure, and that the trap was set. Phase 2 of my plan would begin at 11 p.m., when Sarah Martinez started her shift. By morning, Cassandra and Derek would have confessed to attempted murder on multiple recording devices, in front of a credible witness, while trying to poison someone who was awake and aware of their every move. They thought they were hours away from inheriting $8 million. What they were actually hours away from was the complete destruction of their lives, their freedom, and their future. At 11:15 p.m., Sarah Martinez entered my room for what she believed would be a routine post-surgical check on an elderly patient with anxiety issues. What she was actually walking into was the climax of a murder conspiracy that would soon expand into the largest inheritance fraud investigation in Oregon state history. Alina had positioned herself in the visitor's chair, maintaining the appearance of a concerned friend keeping vigil through the night. The nursing staff had grown accustomed to her presence and no longer paid special attention to her comings and goings. Sarah was exactly as Derek had described, young, earnest, and completely convinced that she was providing compassionate care for a patient with legitimate medical need. She checked my vital signs with professional competence, noted my stable condition on the chart, and began preparing what she believed was prescribed anti-anxiety medication. "How has she been doing?" Alina asked, playing her role perfectly. "Very well. Her recovery is proceeding exactly as expected. Dr. Kellerman will be pleased with her progress." The family mentioned she sometimes has anxiety episodes during hospital stays. "Something about medication to help her sleep." "Yes." Morrison called earlier to confirm the special medication for Mrs. Blackwood's anxiety. "It's not unusual for patients her age to need additional support during recovery." Dr. Morrison, Derek had posed as a physician to authorize the poisoning medication. The sophistication of their planning was remarkable, but it was also creating additional evidence of fraud and impersonation of medical personnel. "What kind of medication?" Alina continued, her journalistic instincts gathering details that would strengthen our case. "Especially prepared, liquid sedative. Very effective for patients who have trouble with traditional anxiety medications. The family physician sent it over specifically for Mrs. Blackwood." Sarah held up a small vial containing clear liquid. "The poison that was supposed to kill me, disguised as medication prescribed by a doctor who didn't exist. When will you administer it?" Mr. Morrison said to wait until around 3 a.m., when she might naturally start experiencing anxiety about being in the hospital overnight. "It's common for patients to become restless during the early morning hours." Derek had timed the poisoning to coincide with a period when my death would seem like a natural complication rather than the result of medication. Even the timing of the murder had been calculated for maximum believability. At 2:45 a.m., Cassandra and Derek returned to the hospital, entering through the visitor entrance that remained unlocked for family members of patients in critical care. They moved quietly through the corridors, mindful of sleeping patients and night staff routines. When they entered my room, Sarah was preparing the final dose of what she believed was anti-anxiety medication. "How is she doing?" Cassandra asked, her voice carrying perfectly convincing maternal concern. "Stable and resting comfortably. I was just about to administer the anxiety medication you arranged. Sometimes patients become restless around this time." "That's very thoughtful." "Mom does struggle with anxiety, especially in unfamiliar environments." Derek moved closer to my bed, checking to ensure I appeared unconscious. "Will this help her sleep more peacefully?" "Oh yeah, this particular medication is very effective for patients who have trouble relaxing during recovery. She should sleep very soundly for the rest of the night." The triple meaning in Sarah's words was chilling. She genuinely believed she was providing comfort care that would help me sleep peacefully. Cassandra and Derek knew she was administering poison that would ensure I slept permanently. Only Alina and I understood that this entire scenario was being documented as evidence of attempted murder. "Should we step out while you give her the medication?" Cassandra asked. "That's not necessary. She's deeply sedated from the surgery. She won't be aware of anything happening around her." Sarah approached my bed with the vial of poison, preparing to mix it into the water cup beside my bed. This was the moment when their plan would transition from conspiracy to attempted murder, the difference between discussing a crime and actually committing it. But it was also the moment when I would demonstrate why 32 years of strategic thinking had prepared me for this exact confrontation. Instead of remaining motionless and allowing Sarah to administer the poison, I opened my eyes and spoke clearly. "I'm awake, Sarah, and I can hear everything you're saying." The reaction was instantaneous and dramatic. Sarah dropped the vial, which shattered on the floor, spreading the poison across the tiles in a puddle that would later be analyzed by forensic investigators. Cassandra gasped and stepped backward, her face draining of color. Derek's mouth opened but no sound emerged. Elena immediately activated the emergency call button, summoning additional nursing staff and security personnel to the room. "Mrs. Blackwood," Sarah stammered, "I thought the medication was supposed to kill me," I said clearly. "But fortunately I've been awake this entire time, recording every conversation and documenting every aspect of this murder plot." I reached under my pillow and retrieved the digital recording device that had been capturing audio throughout the night. "Sarah, you're not in trouble. You were manipulated by people who lied about being medical professionals. But Derek and Cassandra Morrison, you are under citizen's arrest for attempted murder." Hospital security arrived within minutes, followed by Salem Police Department officers who had been positioned nearby according to arrangements I'd made with Elena earlier that evening. While Cassandra and Derek tried to process what was happening, Elena was already providing officers with copies of the recorded evidence we'd accumulated over the past week. "There's something else," I announced as the police began taking statements. "This murder plot is part of a larger criminal enterprise called Heritage Consulting Services that has been helping families commit inheritance fraud across multiple states." I handed Detective Rebecca Morrison, no relation to Derek despite the shared surname, a folder containing everything I'd discovered about Heritage Consulting Services operations. "They've assisted with at least 12 similar murders over the past 3 years," I continued. "I have recorded conversations with their representatives discussing their methods and pricing structure. They operate as a consulting company that helps families accelerate inheritance timelines through systematic murder." Detective Morrison's eyes widened as she reviewed the evidence. "Miss Blackwood, are you saying this is organized crime? Organized, systematic, professional inheritance murder? They recruit families facing financial pressure, provide them with methods and contacts for killing elderly relatives, and help them cover up the crimes by making deaths appear natural. And you have evidence of this?" Elena handed her additional recordings and documentation. Mrs. Blackwood scheduled a consultation with Heritage Consulting Services for Thursday, posing as a potential client. She was planning to gather evidence about their broader operation. "That won't be necessary now," Detective Morrison said. "Based on what you've provided, we have enough evidence to launch a federal investigation. The FBI will want to interview you extensively about Heritage Consulting Services operation." As they led Cassandra and Derek away in handcuffs, my daughter looked back at me with an expression I'd never seen before, pure hatred mixed with disbelief that her plan had failed so completely. "You planned this," she said. "You knew what we were doing and you let us try to kill you anyway." "I knew what you were planning because I documented everything," I replied, "but I never believed my own daughter would actually try to murder me until tonight. I gave you every opportunity to change your mind, to choose family over money. You chose money." Derek's response was more practical. "The recording won't hold up in court. You were under the influence of anesthesia. Your testimony isn't reliable." "I wasn't under general anesthesia," I corrected. "Dr. Kellerman used a modified sedation protocol that kept me conscious throughout the procedure and recovery. Every word you've spoken tonight was heard by a clear, alert mind and recorded on multiple devices." "Multiple devices?" Elena smiled. "Mrs. Blackwood is very thorough about documentation. We have audio recordings from 6 different sources, backup copies stored in multiple locations, and corroborating witness testimony from myself and the medical staff." As the police finished processing the scene and collecting evidence, Kellerman arrived to check on the commotion in her patient's room. "Victoria, I heard there was some kind of incident. Are you all right?" "Better than all right, doctor. Your modified anesthesia protocol worked perfect. I was conscious enough to document a murder attempt while appearing unconscious to the perpetrators." "Murder attempt?" "My daughter and son-in-law have been planning to kill me during recovery by bribing a night nurse to administer poison disguised as anti-anxiety medication. They just attempted to execute that plan." Dr. Kellerman looked around the room at the broken vial, the police tape and the evidence bags being collected by investigators. My God, Victoria, how did you know? I've been recording their planning conversations for a week, but more importantly, I needed them to actually attempt the murder so we could gather evidence about the consulting company that's been helping families across the country commit similar crimes. The scope of what we'd uncovered was still being processed by law enforcement, but preliminary investigations suggested that Heritage Consulting Services had been operating for years with minimal oversight and substantial success. By morning, what had started as a family betrayal had expanded into a federal investigation involving multiple states, dozens of suspicious deaths, and a criminal enterprise that had been systematically helping people murder their relatives for inheritance money. But for me, the most important outcome was simpler. Cassandra and Derek would spend the rest of their lives in prison, and I would spend the rest of mine knowing that I'd protected other families from suffering the same betrayal. They thought they were inheriting $8 million. Instead, they'd inherited life sentences for attempted murder and conspiracy. The tables had been turned so completely that they'd never even realized they were the ones being hunted. The immediate aftermath of their arrest created a chain reaction that would ultimately expose the largest inheritance fraud network in Pacific Northwest history. But first, I had to deal with the personal devastation of watching my own daughter being charged with attempting to murder me for money. Wednesday morning brought FBI Special Agent Patricia Chen to my hospital room. She was part of a task force that specialized in financial crimes involving elderly victims, and the Heritage Consulting Services connection had triggered federal jurisdiction almost immediately. Ms. Blackwood, what you've uncovered has implications far beyond your personal situation, Agent Chen explained, spreading case files across my hospital table. We've been investigating suspicious patterns in inheritance-related deaths across 4 states, but we haven't been able to establish connections between the cases. She showed me photographs of elderly victims whose deaths had been classified as natural causes or surgical complications. Men and women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who had died shortly after medical procedures, all leaving substantial estates to children or relatives who had recently taken out life insurance policies. Heritage Consulting Services appears to be the missing link we've been looking for. Agent Chen continued, your recorded conversations with Richard Valdez provide the first direct evidence that someone is systematically coordinating these murders. How many deaths are we talking about? I asked, based on preliminary analysis of their financial records which we obtained through emergency warrants this morning. Potentially 37 cases over the past 5 years across Oregon, Washington, California, and Idaho. 37 families destroyed by the same methodology that Cassandra and Derek had tried to use against me. 37 elderly people murdered by their own children and relatives with professional assistance from Heritage Consulting Services. The consulting company's business model is remarkably sophisticated, Agent Chen explained. They identify families with elderly members who have substantial assets but strained relationships with potential heirs. They approach family members facing financial pressure and offer their services as state acceleration specialists. How do they find these families? Multiple sources. They monitor obituaries and estate filings to identify high-value inheritance. They maintain contacts with probate attorneys, hospital staff, and insurance agents who provide referrals. They even advertise their services through coded language on financial planning websites. The systematic nature of their operation was staggering. Heritage Consulting Services had essentially industrialized elder abuse and inheritance murder, creating a scalable business model around family betrayal. What's their fee structure? $25,000 to $50,000 per case, paid in installment. Initial consultation and planning services cost $5,000. Medical coordination and staff recruitment cost $15,000. Final execution and cover-up support costs another $25,000 upon successful completion. They're charging families up to $50,000 to murder their elderly relatives, plus ongoing fees for legal support during estate settlement and insurance claim processing. Some families have paid over $75,000 for complete inheritance acceleration service. The business model was as disgusting as it was effective. Heritage Consulting Services had created a professional murder service, specifically targeting elderly people with substantial assets and vulnerable family relationships. Where does the investigation go from here? I asked. We're executing search warrants on Heritage Consulting Services offices, financial records and computer systems. We're also issuing arrest warrants for Richard Valdez and 6 other employees based on the evidence you provided. What about the families who have already used their service? That's where we need your continued cooperation. Your Thursday consultation with Heritage Consulting Services, which you arranged under the false identity, gives us the opportunity to document their operations from the inside. Agent Chen's proposal was both intriguing and terrifying. Instead of canceling the fake consultation I'd scheduled, she wanted me to proceed with the meeting while wearing recording equipment to gather evidence about their broader operation. We'll have agents positioned throughout the building, and you'll be wearing multiple recording devices, she explained. The goal is to get Richard Valdez and his team to explain their full range of services, discuss previous cases, and potentially provide information about other ongoing murder plots. What's the risk? Minimal. From a safety perspective, you'll be meeting in their office building during business hours with federal agents nearby. The risk is primarily legal, if anything goes wrong with the recording equipment or the testimony. Their defense attorneys might challenge the evidence. But I'd spent 32 years taking calculated risks for strategic advantage. This opportunity to help dismantle an organization that had destroyed dozens of families was worth any potential complications. I'll do it, I decided. But I want Elena involved as backup documentation. Elena Rodriguez can pose as your financial advisor. It's common for clients to bring professional support to these kinds of consultations. The building was a respectable high-rise in the financial district, the kind of location that would reassure potential clients about the company's legitimacy and discretion. The office suite itself was tastefully decorated with expensive furniture and artwork that suggested successful professional services. Nothing about the environment would indicate that we were walking into the headquarters of a murder-for-hire operation. Richard Valdez was exactly what I'd expected from his phone voice, mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of smooth professionalism that would inspire confidence in desperate families. He greeted us with practiced sympathy and ushered us into a conference room where he'd prepared materials for our consultation. "Mrs. Thompson," he said using the false name I'd provided, "I understand you're facing a challenging situation with your father's estate planning." "He's 91 years old and in excellent health," I replied, staying in character. "My brothers and I are concerned that he could live another 10 years. And we're facing some urgent financial pressures that can't wait for natural timing." That's exactly the kind of situation we specialize in resolving. Our estate acceleration services have helped hundreds of families navigate these difficult circumstances. Elena, posing as my financial advisor, leaned forward with apparent interest. "What exactly do your acceleration services involve?" Valdez smiled and opened a folder containing what appeared to be marketing materials for systematic murder. "We offer comprehensive solutions that address both the medical and legal aspects of inheritance timing," he explained. "Our medical consultants can identify opportunities to create natural-appearing complications during routine healthcare procedures." "What kind of complications?" "Heart irregularities during minor surgeries, respiratory issues during recovery periods, medication interactions that appear accidental but produce predictable results. The key is ensuring that any medical intervention appears to be a natural consequence of existing health conditions." "How do you arrange access to medical procedures?" "We maintain relationships with healthcare professionals who understand the financial pressures facing modern families. These professionals can recommend procedures that might not be strictly necessary but provide opportunities for our medical consultants to intervene." Valdez was describing a network of corrupt doctors and nurses who would recommend unnecessary medical procedures, specifically to create opportunities for murder. "What about legal complications?" "Insurance investigation." "Our legal team handles all aspects of estate settlement and insurance claim processing. We ensure that appropriate waiting periods are observed, that medical documentation supports natural cause determinations, and that inheritance transfers proceed without suspicious delay." "Have you handled situations similar to ours?" "Absolutely. Just last month we successfully resolved a case involving a 93-year-old gentleman in Seattle, whose children were facing foreclosure on their family business. The gentleman developed complications during a routine knee replacement surgery and passed peacefully in his sleep. The inheritance allowed his children to save their business and secure their financial future. Valdez was casually describing the murder of a 93-year-old man, whose only crime was living too long for his children's financial convenience. How much do your services typically cost? Our fee structure depends on the complexity of the situation and the value of the estate involved. For estates valued over $5 million, our standard package is $50,000, paid in 3 installments. And your success rate? 97% successful completion over the past 5 years. The few unsuccessful cases involved clients who deviated from our recommendations or attempted to accelerate our timeline inappropriately. Elena asked the crucial question: how many families have you helped with estate acceleration? Since we began offering these specialized services in 2019, we've successfully assisted 42 families across the Pacific Northwest. Our clients have inherited a combined total of over $200 million that might otherwise have been delayed or diminished by prolonged healthcare costs. 42 murders, over $200 million in stolen inheritance. Heritage Consulting Services had built a thriving business around systematic elder abuse and family destruction. As the consultation continued, Valdez provided details about their medical contacts, legal support services, and ongoing client relationships that would give federal investigators everything needed to dismantle the entire network. But the most chilling moment came when he showed us a client satisfaction survey that included testimonials from families who had used their services. My father's passing was peaceful and dignified, one testimonial read. Heritage Consulting Services made a difficult time much easier for our family. We couldn't have navigated the estate settlement process without their professional guidance, another family had written. These people had paid Heritage Consulting Services to murder their elderly relatives and were writing positive reviews about the experience. By the time Elena and I left the consultation, we had documented enough evidence to convict Richard Valdez and his entire organization of operating a systematic murder enterprise that had destroyed dozens of families across multiple states. But more importantly, we had identified 12 ongoing cases where Heritage Consulting Services was currently helping families plan the murders of their elderly relatives. 12 families who could still be saved if federal agents moved quickly enough. As we drove back toward Salem, Elena was quiet for several minutes before speaking. Victoria, what we just witnessed, it's evil on a scale I didn't think existed. It exists because families like mine create the market for it, I replied. Cassandra and Derek didn't invent greed or family betrayal. They just found professionals who could help them implement it efficiently. The next phase of the investigation would involve federal agents racing against time to prevent 12 additional murders, while building cases against 42 families who had already succeeded in killing their elderly relative. Heritage Consulting Services was about to discover that their business model had one fatal flaw. They had never encountered a victim who was also a predator, someone with the skills and determination to hunt the hunter. Friday morning brought the coordinated federal operation that would later be called Operation Family Betrayal by the media. 12 simultaneous raids across 4 states, targeting families who were in various stages of implementing Heritage Consulting Services murder protocols against their elderly relative. I watched the news coverage from my hospital room, where I was staying an extra day for observation, not because of surgical complications but because the FBI wanted me in a secure location while they executed arrest warrant. Agent Chen had warned me that desperate people might attempt retaliation once they realized their entire criminal network was collapsing. The scope of what unfolded was staggering. In Seattle, agents arrested a daughter who was preparing to administer poison to her 84-year-old mother during recovery from hip replacement surgery. In Boise, they intercepted a family meeting where 3 siblings were finalizing plans to cause their father's accidental death during a routine cardiac procedure. In Sacramento, agents discovered a son who had already begun replacing his mother's heart medication with substances that would cause fatal arrhythmia. Each case followed the same pattern: financially desperate adult children targeting elderly parents with substantial assets, using Heritage Consulting Services' systematic approach to ensure the murders appeared natural. But the most shocking discovery came from the Heritage Consulting Services office itself. When federal agents executed their search warrant, they found detailed files on over 100 potential cases, families who had been identified as candidates for their services but hadn't yet committed to murder. Richard Valdez and his team had essentially created a database of vulnerable elderly people whose children might be willing to kill them for inheritance money. The targeting methodology is incredibly sophisticated. Agent Chen explained during her afternoon briefing in my hospital room. They analyze public records to identify elderly individuals with substantial assets, but limited social connections. They research family financial situations to identify children or relatives facing economic pressure. They even monitor social media for signs of family conflict or resentment. How do they approach potential clients? Multiple methods. Sometimes they make direct contact through intermediaries who present their services as estate planning or financial consulting. Other times they wait for families to find them through coded advertisements or referrals from previous clients. Elena, who had been coordinating with federal investigators since Thursday evening, spread additional documents across my hospital table. The financial records are the most damning evidence. Heritage Consulting Services has generated over $4 million in revenue from inheritance murder services over the past 5 years. $4 million in profit from destroying families and murdering elderly people. The business had been more successful than many legitimate consulting companies. What about the medical professionals they worked with? I asked. 15 arrests so far, Agent Chen replied. Doctors, nurses, and medical technicians who participated in unnecessary procedures or administered authorized medications. The corruption extends through multiple hospitals and medical practice. The network of complicit medical professionals was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire operation. These were people who had sworn oaths to protect and heal patients, but who had instead become willing participants in systematic murder for financial gain. Patricia Kellerman is completely clean, Agent Chen assured me. She had no knowledge of any plot against you, and her modified anesthesia protocol actually saved your life by allowing you to remain conscious during the attempt. What about Sarah Martinez, the nurse they brought? She's cooperating fully with the investigation. Sarah genuinely believed she was providing legitimate medication prescribed by your family physician. Derek's impersonation of a doctor was so convincing that she never questioned the authorization. The psychological manipulation of healthcare workers like Sarah was another layer of Heritage Consulting Services' systematic evil. They had recruited people who wanted to help patients and twisted their compassion into unwitting participation and murder. But the breakthrough that would make national headlines came Friday afternoon when Valdez agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's provided us with complete client lists, financial records, and operational details going back to the company's founding, Agent Chen announced. We now have evidence of systematic inheritance murder involving 87 cases across 12 states. 87 families destroyed by the same combination of greed and professional criminal services that had nearly killed me. The cooperation agreement requires Valdez to provide testimony against all Heritage Consulting Services clients and medical professionals, Agent Chen continued. He's also agreed to help us identify similar operations in other parts of the country. Elena leaned forward with concern. Are there other companies doing the same thing? Valdez admits there are at least 3 competing organizations offering inheritance acceleration services in different regions. We're looking at a national network of murder-for-hire operations, specifically targeting elderly Americans with substantial assets. The scope of the criminal enterprise was expanding beyond anything investigators had initially imagined. Heritage Consulting Services wasn't an isolated operation. It was part of a growing industry built around systematic elder abuse and inheritance fraud. Saturday morning brought the confrontation I'd been anticipating since Wednesday night. Cassandra requested a meeting at the county jail where she was being held pending arraignment on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. Elena accompanied me to the jail along with Detective Morrison, who wanted to document anything Cassandra might say that could strengthen the prosecution's case. The woman who sat across from me in the visiting room looked nothing like the daughter I'd raised and mentored for 28 years. 3 days in jail had stripped away the polished exterior, revealing someone I barely recognized, someone capable of planning to murder her own mother for money. "Mom," she began, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before, not remorse but calculation. "I think we can work something out. Derek was the one who found Heritage Consulting Services. The whole plan was his idea. I just went along with it because I was scared of what would happen if I refused. She was attempting to manipulate me even from jail, trying to shift blame to Derek while positioning herself as another victim of the conspiracy. Cassandra, I have recordings of you researching inheritance laws 6 months before you met Derek. I have evidence of you taking out life insurance policies on me. I have audio of you discussing the specifics of murdering me during surgery. Those recordings were taken illegally. You recorded private conversations without consent. Oregon is a one-party consent state for audio record. I was present for every conversation I documented, which makes the recordings completely legal. Her expression shifted from manipulation to anger. You planned this whole thing. You knew what we were doing and you set us up. I documented what you were doing after I discovered your plan. I gave you multiple opportunities to change your mind, to choose family over money. You chose to proceed with murder. We needed that money, Mom. Derek's business failed. We were facing foreclosure. The medical bills from your surgery were going to bankrupt us. What medical bill? My surgery was covered by insurance, and I've been paying your mortgage for 8 months. But we knew you'd eventually stop helping us. We knew you'd want us to be independent. This way we could have financial security for life. The twisted logic was breathtaking. She had decided to murder me because she was afraid I might eventually stop giving her money. Cassandra, you were inheriting everything anyway. My will designated you as primary beneficiary of an $8 million estate. You would have been financially secure for life without committing murder, but that could have been years away. You're only 61, you could live another 30 years. And there it was, the core motivation behind their plot. They weren't willing to wait for natural inheritance. They wanted the money immediately, regardless of the cost to me or anyone else. What about Derek? I asked. Derek's facing the same charges I am, but he's the one who contacted Heritage Consulting Services. He's the one who researched the murder method. He's the one who bribed the hospital nurse. And you're the one who provided my safe combination, researched my medical procedures, and helped plan every detail of my murder. Elena spoke for the first time during the visit. Cassandra, your mother's recordings document your active participation in every aspect of this conspiracy. Attempting to blame Derek won't reduce your legal exposure. Cassandra's mask slipped completely, revealing the rage underneath. She trapped us. She knew what we were planning, and she let us walk into a setup. I documented your crime and ensured you couldn't actually kill me. I corrected. That's called protecting myself from people who were trying to murder me. You could have just talked to. You could have explained that you knew what we were planning. And given you the opportunity to find different methods, or target other potential victims. Cassandra, you weren't planning to steal money or commit fraud. You were planning to murder me. There's no conversation that resolves that level of betrayal. Detective Morrison leaned forward. Cassandra, is there anything you want to say about Heritage Consulting Services or the other families they've helped with inheritance acceleration? The question was designed to test whether she would cooperate with the broader investigation in exchange for potential sentencing considerations. I don't know anything about other families, she replied. We only dealt with Richard Valdez directly. Did Valdez mention other clients or discuss the scope of their operations? He said they had experience with these kinds of situations, but he didn't give us details about other cases. It was clear that Cassandra had no information that would help investigators with the broader Heritage Consulting Services case. Her cooperation would be limited to testifying against Derek, which wouldn't significantly benefit the prosecution, since they already had overwhelming evidence against both of them. As the visit ended, Cassandra made one final attempt at manipulation. Mom, I'm still your daughter. I made a terrible mistake, but we're still family. Family members don't try to murder each other for inheritance money, I replied. You stopped being my daughter the moment you decided my death was worth more than my life. Leaving the jail that afternoon, I felt a strange combination of closure and emptiness. The woman I'd raised and loved no longer existed, if she ever had. What remained was someone who had calculated the value of my death and found it acceptable. But there was also satisfaction in knowing that her attempt to destroy me had instead led to the dismantling of a criminal network that had destroyed dozens of other families. Cassandra and Derek would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Heritage Consulting Services was finished. Richard Valdez and his team faced federal charges that would ensure they never again profited from family betrayal. Most importantly, 12 elderly people were still alive because of the evidence I'd gathered, and hundreds more would be protected from similar plots in the future. The hunt was nearly over, and the predators had become the prey. 6 months after that devastating night at Meridian General Hospital, I stood in the ballroom of the Portland Hilton watching 300 family members whose elderly relatives had been targeted by inheritance murder plot. The Elder Protection Foundation's first annual conference had drawn attendees from across the country. People who had survived betrayal, families who had been saved by federal intervention, and law enforcement professionals who were still processing cases from Operation Family Betrayal. The foundation was my answer to a question that had haunted me since Cassandra's arrest. How do we prevent other families from experiencing this level of betrayal? How do we protect elderly Americans from children who view them as investment opportunities rather than human beings deserving of love and respect? Elena Rodriguez, now serving as the Foundation's executive director, approached the podium to introduce the evening's keynote presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, our founder Victoria Blackwood will now share the latest developments in the Heritage Consulting Services investigation and discuss the legislative changes that have resulted from Operation Family Betrayal. The applause was warm but subdued. Everyone in this room understood that we were gathered because of crimes that shouldn't exist, because some people were willing to murder their own parents for money. As I took the stage, I looked out at faces that reflected my own journey from victim to survivor to advocate. These were people who had discovered that their children, siblings, or other relatives were planning to kill them for inheritance money. Some had been saved by federal intervention, others had survived attempted murders through luck, intuition, or their own strategic thinking. When I started recording my daughter's conversation 6 months ago, I thought I was documenting an isolated family crisis. I had no idea that Cassandra and Derek were part of a systematic criminal enterprise that had been destroying families across multiple states for years. The final Heritage Consulting Services statistics were staggering. Federal investigators had confirmed 93 murders committed by clients who had paid for inheritance acceleration services, over $300 million in stolen inheritance. Medical professionals in 17 states, who had participated in unnecessary procedures designed to create opportunities for murder. But the most important number isn't the scope of their past crimes, it's the number of lives we've saved through prevention and early intervention. Since Operation Family Betrayal, the Elder Protection Foundation has identified and stopped 47 inheritance murder plots in the planning stages. The prevention work had become the Foundation's primary mission. We maintained a confidential hotline for elderly people who suspected their families might be planning financial or physical harm. We provided investigation services for families experiencing suspicious behavior from potential heirs. Most importantly, we offered protection and relocation assistance for elderly individuals whose lives were in immediate danger. Sarah Martinez, the nurse who unwittingly participated in the attempt on my life, has become one of our most effective advocates for medical professional education. I continue. Sarah now trains healthcare workers to recognize signs of inheritance-motivated abuse and report suspicious family behavior. Sarah's transformation from unwitting accomplice to fierce advocate had been remarkable. Her guilt over nearly participating in my murder had motivated her to dedicate her career to protecting elderly patients from family members who might exploit medical procedures for criminal purposes. The legislative changes resulting from Operation Family Betrayal have created new protections for elderly Americans facing inheritance-motivated threats. I announced, gesturing to a screen displaying key policy achievements. The Enhanced Elder Protection Act, signed into federal law 3 months earlier, had established mandatory reporting requirements for medical professionals who suspected inheritance-motivated abuse. It also created federal penalties for operating consulting services that facilitated elder abuse or inheritance fraud. More significantly, the law required waiting periods and additional documentation for life insurance policies taken out on elderly individuals by family members, closing the loophole that had allowed Cassandra and Derek to insure my life without my knowledge. But legislation alone cannot prevent family betrayal, I continued. Prevention requires education, awareness, and the courage to acknowledge that some of our most trusted relationships may be built on deception. The audience included dozens of elderly individuals who had discovered through investigation, surveillance, or simple intuition that their children or relatives were planning to harm them for financial gain. Their stories had become the foundation's case studies for recognizing warning signs and implementing protection strategies. Margaret Thompson, an 82-year-old from Vancouver, had discovered that her son was researching methods for inducing heart attacks in elderly patients. When she confronted him, he admitted to being recruited by a consulting service similar to Heritage Consulting Services. Robert Chen, a 79-year-old retired engineer from Spokane, had noticed his daughter asking suspicious questions about his medications and medical procedures. Investigation revealed that she had been planning to cause fatal drug interactions during his diabetes treatment. Jennifer Martinez, a 68-year-old teacher from Boise, had overheard her son discussing inheritance timelines with someone who turned out to be a Heritage Consulting Services representative. Each case demonstrated that inheritance-motivated elder abuse was more common than anyone had previously understood. The Heritage Consulting Services client base represented only a fraction of families where adult children were actively planning to harm elderly relatives for financial gain. The psychological profiles we've developed from Heritage Consulting Services clients reveal disturbing patterns, I explained, referencing research conducted by the Foundation's consulting psychologist. These aren't desperate people facing immediate financial crisis. They're individuals who have come to view their elderly relatives as obstacles to their desired lifestyle rather than human beings deserving of protection. The research had identified several risk factors that made elderly individuals vulnerable to inheritance-motivated abuse. Substantial assets combined with limited social connections, children facing financial pressure or lifestyle expectations they couldn't meet through legitimate means, and family histories of dysfunction or emotional manipulation. Most importantly, we've learned that traditional approaches to elder abuse prevention are inadequate for addressing inheritance-motivated crimes. I continue. These perpetrators aren't strangers or caregivers, they're children who have been trusted with financial information, medical decisions, and emotional intimacy. The Foundation's protection protocols addressed this reality by focusing on documentation, verification, and strategic planning rather than traditional family intervention approach. Elderly individuals who suspected their families might be planning financial or physical harm were taught to gather evidence, establish independent support networks, and implement legal protections that couldn't be overridden by family members. Elena Rodriguez will now present our latest initiative, the Survivor Support Network, which connects elderly individuals who have experienced family betrayal with others who have faced similar situations. Elena took the stage to describe support groups, mentorship programs, and advocacy training that helped elderly people rebuild their lives after discovering that their children or relatives had been planning to harm them. The network had grown to include over 400 members across 38 states. Monthly meetings provided emotional support, practical advice, and collaborative strategies for preventing similar crimes against other elderly individuals. But the evening's most powerful moment came when Detective Rebecca Morrison, who had led the initial investigation into Cassandra and Derek's crimes, presented the latest developments in ongoing prosecution. As of today, federal prosecutors have secured convictions against 87 individuals who used Heritage Consulting Services to murder elderly relatives, Detective Morrison announced. The average sentence has been life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The audience erupted in sustained applause. Justice for the victims of inheritance murder had been swift and comprehensive. Additionally, civil asset forfeiture proceedings have recovered over $200 million in stolen inheritances, which are being returned to surviving family members or donated to elder protection organizations. Richard Valdez himself had been sentenced to life imprisonment after pleading guilty to operating a criminal enterprise that facilitated murder. His cooperation with federal investigators had been instrumental in identifying and prosecuting Heritage Consulting Services clients, but it hadn't reduced his sentence given the scope of his crime. Cassandra Morrison and Derek Morrison were sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole last month, Detective Morrison continued. Their case became the template for prosecuting inheritance-motivated murder conspiracy. I felt no satisfaction hearing about their sentences, only a profound sadness that my daughter had chosen money over family and would spend the rest of her life paying for that choice. As the evening concluded, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me from successful real estate developer to elder protection advocate. 6 months ago, I had been focused on building wealth and preparing my daughter to inherit my business empire. Today, I was leading a national movement to protect elderly Americans from their own children. The irony wasn't lost on me. Cassandra's attempt to steal my inheritance had inspired me to donate most of my wealth to preventing similar crimes against other families. The fight against inheritance-motivated elder abuse is far from over, I concluded my remarks, but we've proven that education, awareness, and strategic intervention can save lives and protect families from the kind of systematic betrayal that Heritage Consulting Services made possible. Most importantly, we've demonstrated that elderly Americans don't have to be victims. We can be hunters, investigators, and advocates who turn the tables on anyone foolish enough to underestimate our determination to protect ourselves and each other. As I left the stage that night, I thought about the recording device that had started this entire journey. The simple decision to document suspicious behavior rather than confront it directly. That strategic thinking had saved my life and dismantled a criminal network that had destroyed dozens of families. The Elder Protection Foundation would continue that work, ensuring that other elderly Americans had the tools, resources, and support necessary to protect themselves from inheritance-motivated betrayal. Cassandra had taught me that family loyalty couldn't be assumed or taken for granted. But she had also inadvertently inspired me to build something more valuable than any inheritance, a community of survivors who refused to let anyone profit from elder abuse ever again. The hunt was over, but the mission of protection would continue for as long as greed motivated some children to view their parents as investment opportunities rather than human beings, deserving of love, respect, and the right to live without fear of those who should protect them most. That was Victoria Blackwood's true legacy. Not the real estate empire I'd built, but the shield I'd created to protect other families from experiencing the betrayal that had nearly destroyed mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.